we are going to put this on our YouTube page for people that couldn't make it tonight. So good evening, everyone. All right. Very, very all over the place tonight, so I will try to stay on track. I had a very, very long, intense meeting this morning, and everybody in the meeting, not just me, has completely lost our brains. Luckily, I didn't have to do anything with math tonight. So I am Sherry Sanderson. I am the library director here at the Boulder Junction Public Library. I thank you for complimenting our schedule for the summer. We work really hard every year to come up with unique things to put on the schedule, bring in people that maybe we haven't had before or haven't had in a while. And I always like to mention, or at least I try to remember to mention, that none of this would be possible without the Friends of the Library. So our Friends of the Library is not a large group when it comes to like our actual meetings, but when it comes to our fundraisers, they are a large group of people that come out. So they have the library used book sale. They have the Taste of Boulder Junction in October, the Cookie Walk and Thanksgiving. They do memberships, which there are membership forms on the cart. They do, in the library, they sell the felt birds. That is donated by the person that makes them. They do the greeting cards, also donated by the person that makes them. We have history books, we have book bags. So there's a variety of sources of income. And all those variety of sources of income help us buy books and materials because our town only funds our salaries and utilities. So everything else, all of our books, all of our DVDs, all of our programming, our cleaning person, our, what else? Subscriptions, everything else is paid for through the Friends of the Library, grants, or other donations that are given to the library board, which lately has unfortunately been memorials. I am done with that. As much as I like that income, it's been too much lately. So they, this year, have given us $30,000. So we can have programs like this and John Bates and forest foraging and the children's reading program and our craft classes and our art exhibits and all of the many things we do. So I thank them so much. And if you want to help support the library, you can support the Friends of the Library. As I said, become a member by filling out the form and giving a very small donation or coming to our fundraisers. I used to always list our upcoming programs, but it is too long of a list and you're never going to remember what I just said. So I'm just going to point out the next one. Everything else is on flyers on the cart, on our Facebook page, on our website. So the next program is next Thursday at 7 p.m. We started this Our Story History program in conjunction with the Boulder Junction Area Historical Society. And this month is Moonshine in the Northwoods with Jim Bokern, who is a wonderful historian from the Manitouche Waters Historical Society. I also need to mention, because it's coming up soon, we have an appraisal event next Saturday, Antiques and Collectibles Appraisal Event. It's not full yet. I think people are thinking that it's so close to the event, I bet you they're already full, but we're not full. We still have some room. So if you want to, for free, for no cost, have an item appraised, we still have room on the schedule, but you have to call us or stop in because we have to get a lot of information from you to get that whole database filled out. As I said before, we are recording tonight's program and we will be putting it on our library YouTube page for anybody that can't attend tonight. So if you know of anybody that was like, oh, they really wanted to come tonight, please let them know that if you Google Boulder Junction Public Library YouTube, you'll find us. And I am honored to introduce tonight's speaker, whose book I am reading right now, and I am halfway through it in no time, and I cannot believe it because I needed to last through my camping trip this weekend, but I'm reading it too quickly, so I have to slow down, otherwise I'm going to read it before camping is done. Amy Pease is an alumna of the University of Wisconsin and the Madison Writers Studio and works as a nurse practitioner where she is a nationally recognized HIV specialist. She lives in Wisconsin with her husband and 2 children, and the novel Northwoods is her first novel. And so I'm going to turn it over to Amy.
Thanks, Sherry. Well, so then I think that answers the question as to whether we're allowed to talk spoilers in tonight's discussion. So no spoilers, okay. because it's not a very long book.
I can plug my ears.
It's not a very long book, so yeah, you might have run out of camping reading. So, well, thank you so much for inviting me, and it's good to see everybody. I always just am curious, who here has already read the book?
One?
Okay.
Maybe just
Only
Okay.
one.
It's really good. That's why I'm here.
Well, great. So as you might know, Northwoods is my debut, and it's a murder mystery, and it's set in a fictional town called Shaky Lake, but you know what? It's practically a fictionalized town of where you guys are right now, pretty much. The Minocqua type area. Which I'm originally from Green Bay, so, but I spent a whole bunch of time in the Northwoods of Wisconsin growing up and recently. So I incorporated a lot about the setting in the book, that I hope rings true to those of you who live essentially where it is set. So when I do discussions like this, I'm really a fan of the Q&A approach. So is anybody here a good question asker? Do I have curious people tonight? It's really hard for me to see because you're way far away from the camera, so I can see people way out in the distance. So just shout out things, I suppose.
Yes.
You think it's a good question?
Oh, no. You didn't have a question.
Well, I'm the one person that raised their hand and said that they read the book, and I enjoyed it very much. That's why I'm here tonight. I wanted to have a chance to see you, and I guess my question is, there's a lot about the opioid epidemic in your book, and I'm wondering if your medical background helped you with understanding that in any way, or if you were able to take some of your real world experience to that topic when you incorporated that into the storyline.
Yes. Yes to all of that. So I I started writing this book in like 2016, maybe 2017. And I remember wanting to incorporate some of the sort of conspiracy type things that I didn't need to stretch my imagination too far to believe when it comes to the healthcare industry, because I've been a healthcare provider for over 20 years now. And, we think to, it's become almost like a stereotype type now, but the sort of shady corporate big pharma thing, back then wasn't as well known. So I thought it would be really kind of cool to have a mystery with a conspiracy that ties in the opioid epidemic. And part of the reason that was, I think, something that I could speak to, and thankfully I myself have not struggled with the addiction part of it, but when I was in grad school and early in my career, it was at the absolute height of OxyContin prescribing. So I think back to like a grad course I took, and this is at University of Wisconsin. This was not just, some shady school, where we had a lecture where they talked about using OxyContin for patients, prescribing it for patients, and used all these studies, pulled up all of these tables and charts and graphs to show us how it was effective, how it was safe, how it didn't cause addiction, all sorts of things. And then, fast forward to a couple years to when I'm actually the one prescribing medication to patients. That's when the pharmaceutical reps come to the office and want to take you to lunch. That's when they, invite you to lectures that are basically just fancy dinners. And I didn't prescribe a ton of OxyContin. I mean, a little bit here and there, but at the same time, you can't help but feel like you played some sort of role in all that came to pass because of OxyContin. And it also gave me the perspective, like it made me pretty cynical, I would say. And a fair amount of that cynicism maybe made its way into Northwoods as part of the underlying conspiracy. So yeah, it was something that I was able to tap into when I was coming up with the plot. And I thought it was interesting because when I was writing it, I remember showing my husband a draft of it, and he was like, oh, that the pharmaceutical thing, that's just really far-fetched. I don't think that'll work. And I said, I swear this kind of stuff happens. And then probably 6 months later, the whole Purdue Pharma, OxyContin, Sackler family thing came to light. And I was very validated that I was not completely out of left field with this sort of thing. Yeah. Well, because I don't, I'm not a law enforcement person. So to write a police procedural involves a lot of trying to skirt around the actual police procedure when you don't really know the ins and outs of it, as well as healthcare, which is why I tapped into my healthcare stuff a lot. And it was the opioid thing, but also, addiction and mental health in general. I think thankfully my work has given me a perspective into that not a lot of people get to see. And I hope that I did it justice and sidestep stereotypes that I think we all have, that a lot of us have, that are really pervasive, and brought like compassion to the topic.
Have you written all your life? Like, were you a young person that wrote stories a lot when you were, elementary school, etc.?
Well, so the way I became a writer is when I was in second grade, I won an essay competition. And I don't remember what the essay was about, but I remember that I won a bicycle light, and for all the nighttime bike riding I did. And my teacher told me that I was a good writer. And when you're 7 or 8 years old, you just take everything a grown-up tells you as if it's the truth. And so I just was like, oh, I'm a writer, I guess. And so my whole life after that, I was interested in the craft of writing. And I read all sorts of, books about the craft of writing. When I was older, I would take, like, if there'd be a little free workshop at the library, I would watch videos, read magazines, everything I could do to learn more about writing. But I never really actually wrote anything. And then I think about 6 years ago, I thought, well, I probably should do that now. And so Northwoods is the first thing I wrote. So I had practiced in my mind for many years and then finally sat down and wrote it.
How difficult was it to get published?
It's you hear horror stories when you're an aspiring author looking to get traditionally published, because they're self-publishing, but this book is traditionally published, like through a big publishing house, Simon & Schuster in this case. You hear horror stories, like only 1 in a million people will ever get their books to print. But I really think that what happens is that, 50% of people say, oh, I want to write a book someday. Well, 95% of those people never start. And of the people who start, 90% of those people never finish. And, when I came up with the idea for Northwoods, I didn't know if this was going to be a book that I would finish or not. But the more I wrote it, the more I liked it, the more excited I was about it, to the point where I'm like, okay, I think I have something here. I need to now begin to educate myself on how to get it published, because that's a whole different process. And I think that it was not seemingly that difficult to get this book published, because I really think it's because I did a ton of polishing and preparation ahead of time before I even showed the manuscript, before I even started looking to publish it. So I do think that that made it a lot easier for me. But if anyone's interested, I can kind of give a rundown on what it takes to go from, you know, a stack of papers with a story written down to, you know, the bookshelf. Are people interested in that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So when you're traditionally publishing, you, for the most part, have to start out first with a literary agent. And that is someone who contacts publishers on your behalf, someone who negotiates contracts with publishers on your behalf. You can't just, you know, call up Simon and Schuster and say, I've got this book, would you take a look at it? So it's almost like a little bit of a gatekeeper, this literary agent. So you find an agent, unless you have a personal connection to one or like a personal referral, you pretty much just go onto their website or go onto websites where it lists agents, or search on various places online to find the names and emails of agents. And most of them want you to email the first 10 pages, give or take, of your story, plus not a full synopsis, but like what you might read on the back of the book, like a little teaser, which is called it's called a query letter. And so you send that, you email it, and then you hope for the best. And all of these agents' websites say, if you haven't heard back from us in 12 weeks, assume it's a no. So I made a spreadsheet, put down all of the agents I could find who were accepting manuscripts within my genre. And then starting January 2022, I like just started sending out emails. Like my goal would be, okay, I'm going to do 10 a week. And so I found an agent. Then you send that, and then they'll get back to you and they will request the full manuscript. So you send them the whole manuscript, and then they get back to you again if they're interested. And I found my agent within about 2 months. And you hear horror stories about people looking for an agent for a decade. You know, and I'm sure there can be a lot of different reasons for that. And I guess the reason that I think I did not run into that problem is partly because crime fiction is a popular genre, and also because I think that I made darn sure that what I was showing that agent was something quite polished to begin with. You know, this was not an early draft. This was something I had been working on for years. I had had many eyes look at it, you know, beta readers and that sort of thing. Okay, so once I had the agent, she did a little bit of polishing with me, and then she submitted it to editors at various publishing imprints. And as you might know, there are 5 big publishers in the United States, and they all have like dozens of little imprints that are within the same silo. Like Simon and Schuster is the parent of Atria Books, and Atria Books is the parent of my publisher, Emily Bessler Books. So my agent sent my manuscript and a little teaser to a bunch of different editors at various publishers. And it was a real similar process to when I was trying to find my agent. They, you know, thankfully they all got back to her right away and wanted to read the full thing right away. And it did not take very long in that regard either. So I think I sold the book to Simon and Schuster maybe after a couple weeks of submissions to publishers, which again, you hear about people having their books on submission to publishers for multiple years. So if anybody is an aspiring writer, I would, you know, a couple of pieces of advice I would give are, you know, first of all, understand that you can do it. You hear all this naysaying, but it's really just a matter of following through, of really taking that next step, and seeing it through to the end. But also make sure that you make that manuscript as good as you possibly can before you start looking for publication. That's a very long-winded answer. Sorry.
So did
Go
the
ahead.
publisher, did the publisher edit it extensively, or did they go pretty much with what you had?
They went with pretty much what I had. Um, so there's one chapter, and I can't tell you which chapter because only one of you knows what I'm talking about anyway here. There is one chapter that I had to add towards like in the third act because I needed to have a like a more clear explanation of what the conspiracy was. I mean, I really like complicated plots, especially with mysteries. And we just needed like a little moment to fully explain what was happening. So, I don't know how to even like tell you what that scene would be so you can go back and think of it later, but there was one chapter that was added. So the editing process is interesting. Like I said, it was quite polished already. So there was just a few little tweaks, but then once I'm done with my main editor, then they send it off to the copy editor. And the copy editor is the person who makes sure that if the main character's eyes are blue on page 1, they're blue on page 300 too. And they, check to see whether you're repeating words often. And it was kind of funny because apparently I used the word brows or eyebrows something like 83 times. That the copy editor pointed out, which was really embarrassing. But Marge, who's one of the main characters in the book, is just not a big talker. So she communicates with her face a lot. And yeah, so I had to go back and trim some of the eyebrow comment. And I did a podcast because Northwoods was in the Book of the Month Club, was a Book of the Month Club selection. And they did a podcast interview with me for it. And I didn't know until after the fact that they put the little subtitle of the episode as Amy Pease is a little overly fond of eyebrows. Yeah.
So how did it get promoted? You got published and then, okay, you gotta get it out. I'm assuming that the publisher does a lot of that work. Or how involved were you in that promotion?
They assigned me a marketer and a publicist, and the marketer did she like sent out advanced reader copies, so ARCs. She sent those out to indie bookstores and influencers, and they arranged Goodreads giveaways. My publicist got, like she somehow got it into People Magazine, and the New York Times Book Review. And I don't really know how they go about doing those things, but I did have at least a couple people whose, job was to publicize and get the word out about the book. And then, no one told me that I had to do things like social media, but I try to go on Instagram sometimes. It's not something that frankly I have that much time to do at the moment. But I do like to just put pictures on there from time to time.
So there are book influencers? I guess.
Yes. Yes, there are bookstagrammers, book talk, booktube. So for example, there is an influencer named Cindy Burnett, and she has a podcast called Thoughts from a Page. But she also, has an Instagram. I don't know that she has TikTok, but she's on social media too. And it'll be like, these are the books for January that she's most excited for. Or like people have book clubs. Like there's a book club in Milwaukee called Thrillers by the Book Milwaukee. And the girl that runs that, she's on Instagram. She gives book recommendations all the time, has like 30,000 people who follow her Instagram channel. So yeah, it's a lot is based on influencers these days. Which is kind of tough because it so much of it feels outside of your control. And it really kind of is. I mean, in fact, I had to sort of just accept that there's only so much of this process that I had control over. And once my book is to the publisher and I've made all the edits I need to make, then I can only do so much.
So the timeline you described just now, I'm a librarian, and so I recognize that that timeline is really fast. Like is your publisher clamoring for another read from you soon? Because clearly they wanted your book right away. Tell us that you started looking for an agent in January of 22, and for us to be sitting here in mid-24 talking about your book is like really quick. So are you
Well,
working-
so I sold it in the spring of 2022, and it was fully complete from my end of things by, I want to say, October of 2022. And then it was published January 2024, which gives an interesting insight into how long it takes for a fully written book to be produced and put to market. I mean, I don't really know what all went down in that year and a half, but it was a long time. So I signed a deal with my publisher for the next 2 books in the series. So Northwoods is the first in a series. Yeah. Which I've never had a deadline before. With the first book, I just wrote it when I had time, which I usually didn't have time. Which is why it took me years and years and years to write it. It took me let's say 4 years to write it, I would say. But now I have to have the second book, technically my deadline by contract is November 1st of this year. So, which, I think that'll be okay, but it's a whole different ball game when you got a deadline, because I've got, a job too. So, and I've got kids and a family. And so it's a lot of trying to figure out when to get this work actually done.
How do you juggle that? I mean, do you spend between midnight and 1 a.m. writing every day, or?
No, I don't think I could even do that if I tried. Even trying to be creative after my kids go to bed at like 9 o'clock, there's only so much I can do. So what I did when I signed the contract for the second and third books was I cut back my hours to 80%. And so a couple days a week, I go in a couple hours later than usual. And that's when I fit my writing in. And then on the weekends, I try to get a few hours in each day on the weekends too. Right now it's like particularly crunch time. But it's very time consuming. I'm kind of forgetting how time consuming it was. You can write a book in not that much time, but it's not going to be a very good one. So I have to make sure that I, give it the time it needs and the space it needs. And so, you'll hear authors talk about their first drafts, and oftentimes authors have very long first drafts. So for frame of reference, a modern novel is anywhere between 80 and 100,000 words, with a little bit of variation based on genre. Which when I was writing Northwoods, and I'm like, okay, well, I'll make it 90,000 words then. And it was 90,000 words. And I'm the opposite, where it's really hard for me to get words down on the page at all. So like my first draft, instead of being way long and then I've got to go back and cut stuff, my first drafts will be like 25,000 words. And then every pass through, I add more and more and more and more and more. And I don't know, I don't know if which way is better or worse. I don't think I have a choice. That's just the way my brain works.
Did you select the title?
I did. That was the name I had been just referring to the project as for years and years on my own. And then no one told me to name it something different. So I didn't. There was a little bit of a moment when they tried to cram Northwoods as a single word onto one line on the cover. It's like it just barely fit. Yeah, so there was something else I was gonna say about that, and I can't remember what it was now. Well, there's the other book that came out just a few months before mine called Northwoods by Daniel Mason, which is a great book and I love it. They're very, very different books. So And people are like, oh, do you think it hurt anything for you that your book came? Well, I think his book was it was like on the finalist list for a Pulitzer. So like, no, that didn't cause any problems for my book. Because when people look up his book, in fact, I've had people come up to me and say, oh, I checked out that, I meant to check out his book from the library, but when I got to pick up my hold, it was your book. So I read it anyway, and I liked it. But I do recommend that book. It was very good.
So there's no
Oh, I know what I
copy-
was,
Oh,
I
go ahead.
was gonna say, this is just one of those other little quirks about the publishing thing. So I don't know if the reader who's already read the book, I don't know if you recall, but in the very first chapter, the opening scene, there is music coming across the water, and the song is At Last by Etta James. And I wanted to include the first 4 lines of lyrics. Just, I don't know, just because that was the song in my imagination that was playing, and I really wanted to put that in there. Well, for copyright reasons, you have to go get the permission. And I remember telling my agent and my editor about this, and they're like, okay, well, good luck with that. So I spent the next 6 months trying to figure out who even owned the rights to that song. And finally I did find it, and I thought, I'm going to go through all this, and then it's going to be prohibitively expensive, and I'll just, I could tell that my editor thought it was not worth like going to all this hassle to include it, but I ended up figuring it out, and it was $500, and I thought, okay, fine, I will cough up $500 so that those 4 lines can be quoted in the first chapter of the book. And I don't know if a single person even notices them, but they're in there for me. So
Oh, wow.
I think I interrupted someone speaking earlier.
Well, I was just gonna say, so titles are not copyrighted. You have a book called Northwoods. Somebody else has a book.
Search the catalog. There's a lot of duplicate titles.
They really-
Oh, yeah. Yes. No, the titles aren't, I mean, I suppose there might be some situations where titles could be copyrighted, but not that I've ever heard of with books. So, I mean, you don't want to be the 100th person to name your book Northwoods. So I did a little bit of, just research to make sure I wasn't naming it something. I thought, and I still do think that if my publisher thought it was not the right title, they would have had me do something different. They've been really great. So Emily Bessler Books is an imprint, like I said, of Atria, which is an imprint of Simon & Schuster. And Emily Bessler Books mostly does the big military thriller guys. So Jack Carr, Brad Thor, Vince Flynn, those are all Emily Bessler books. And then those guys and me. So, and I don't know, I mean, there is a little bit of military link in my book, but I don't think that was, who knows how they ended up like sifting through their options to choose Northwoods. But they've been really good. You also hear horror stories about how authors find their experience in traditional publishing, where, editors make changes without, their approval, or they're pressured into changing certain things. And none of that has happened with me, thankfully. I've had wonderful, wonderful experiences with everybody every step of the way. I wanted, when it came to the cover, because I get asked a lot about the cover, I had in mind, in fact, I have one on my back wall. I don't know if anyone can see, but there's like a travel poster looking thing that says Northwoods. And actually I got that as a gift from the Madison Public Library when I did an event for them. But I wanted the cover to be kind of like those vintage travel posters. I thought that would look super cool. And the publishers were like, oh, well, so they didn't go for that. But the first thing they sent me was something quite similar to what the cover is right now. It was a silhouette of a man standing on the edge of a lake, except in the first version, it was all entirely like light blue, shades of light blue. and it looked like it was in coastal Georgia. So it didn't look anything like northern Wisconsin. And it occurred to me that none of these people have even been to Wisconsin at all. So I emailed my agent when I saw this cover that they sent me, and I tried really hard not to panic. And thankfully she helped me like communicate what I was looking for. And all I ended up doing was I Googled Wisconsin lake sunset, and it was just some photo. I mean, you know, because the landscape, like on the shoreline, it's kind of rocky with trees and it's not marshland. I mean, there is marshland, but anyway, so I sent a photo that they, you know, pretty almost like literally used. They made it into art, of course, but it's just like a sunset photo from the side of a lake. So it was that was the only part where I was like, oh gosh, I don't know what to do. This isn't what I wanted, but then they changed it. Now I like it.
Do you have an outline for your next two, or an outline for each of them yet?
So I wrote Northwoods without an outline. I did. So I don't, for those of you who know, there's a couple approaches to fiction writing. One of them is called writing by the seat of your pants. So basically just writing and seeing what comes out of your fingers and your mind. And then there's outlining. And I wrote Northwoods by the seat of my pants, and I don't recommend I don't know if I don't recommend that. There's certain good things to it, but when you're writing a mystery, it's really hard to make the pieces fall into place properly if you don't plan ahead, or like sort of you know, what do you call it? Where you sort of manufacture it in reverse. Reverse engineer. So for the second book, I tried to do outlining, and I don't know that it made it that much easier, to be honest. I, at this point, am way, way past that phase. I'm in like probably about the third or fourth draft phase of it. But I tried outlining, and I don't know that it made it any easier, but maybe a little bit faster. So like with the first book, I wrote the way the idea for this book came in a moment of boredom. So I was driving to work one day and I was stuck in traffic, and I just challenged myself to come up with an image of something, any scene, whatever popped into my head first. And what it was a melancholy man floating in a lake on a warm summer night when suddenly music starts playing across the water. Which, for those of you who've read or started the book, that's the opening chapter. So that night when I got home, I sat down, I wrote that opening chapter, and I wrote the next 2 chapters right away. So the first 3 chapters right away. In fact, those in their printed form are very, very similar to like that very first draft I wrote. They over all of the edits over all the years, those didn't change much. Especially the first chapter. So when you read the first chapter, just know that was more or less what the first draft was. It was so vivid in my mind that it, you know, kind of just found its way onto the page. So I wrote those right away. And then I knew what I wanted for the finale scene. And so I wrote that. And then it took me 3 or 4 years to fill in all the pieces. And it was just a hot mess, you know, and you get one idea and you write it, and then you realize, well, then I can't do this over here at the end. And so I have to go back and change things. So I'm an aspiring outliner, but I don't think I've gotten it down yet.
Did you have to do much research for the book, or was it kind of just your own background knowledge of the Northwoods and of the issues that you were talking about?
I had to do a little bit of law enforcement research, which mostly just amounted to going on the Facebook group that I sometimes chat with. It's called Cops and Writers. And like just asking a question from time to time. Like, for example, so the book is set in Wisconsin, but I wanted the FBI to get involved, and they're located in Illinois, in Chicago. And so I had to look up, like, would it happen that the FBI would get involved in what would initially appear to be a local Wisconsin case, would they get involved in the first place? And I found out that yes, they would, because, and I don't think this is a spoiler, it's on the back thing, but there's a missing child involved. So yes, they could, FBI would get involved potentially if there's a missing child involved. And yes, they would like cross state lines to help in certain situations. So it was all about, okay, what's plausible? Like, let's not even go down with what's most likely in real life to happen when it comes to law enforcement stuff. Like, plausible was my my goal. Which I did not have a police person do beta reading at all. And this time I do have someone who's agreed to be a beta reader for me. And a beta reader, if you don't know, is just someone who reads like a farther along draft of your work and gives you feedback on it. So we'll see. Maybe I shouldn't have, maybe I should just live in ignorance of all the things I'm messing up with law enforcement stuff, but I better not.
Are you a big mystery reader?
I read a little bit of everything. And I would not consider myself a big mystery reader particularly. Honestly, what I read the most for fun is romance, especially historical romance. So I think that there are one thing I like about romance is that they are very much about embracing a trope, okay? And so a trope is a commonly used literary like situation or premise or concept. So for example, in romance, a common trope would be an enemies to lovers thing, or you know, just those sorts of commonly used storylines. And I like the fact that romance is on board with using those and crime fiction is on board with using those, because I love that, and I think that there's a lot of, I think that Northwoods is fairly tropey, to be honest. You've got the classic alcoholic divorcee, like law enforcement guy who's just barely holding on, and the war veteran thing. It's a lot of tropes, and I think what I enjoy when I read is when it's a trope that I like that's been turned ever so slightly to make it slightly different. Like the whole concept of the same but different. Which I think that was my goal with Northwoods, was to do that. And I hope that I succeeded. It definitely can make it, when you're trying to just like sum up the plot to someone in a sentence or two, it can make it sound kind of just unremarkable, I will say. But I would rather have a book that I enjoy rather than a premise that's really cool that maybe isn't all that fun to read. Are a lot of you mystery readers?
Yes.
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 Well, I had my in-laws threw me a party, and they invited, because they're in multiple book clubs, one of which was it was all mystery books. And so far, I think that was my biggest event. They had it at their house, and there was like 50 people who showed up. And everybody had already read the book, so we could talk spoilers and everything too. But folks are really, really committed to crime fiction, and it's super cool. And last year I went, and I'm going again this year, to the Mystery Writers of America annual conference, which is called BoucherCon, and this year it's in Nashville. And I'm going to be on a panel with Hank Philippi Ryan, and which I've read a couple of her books. She's got tons of books. I don't know if any of you guys have read any of hers. but I think it's a panel where I talk about how I'm juggling like writing with the rest of my work responsibilities and life responsibilities. So we'll see what I come up with. Oh, let's see. What else? What else would be interesting to hear about?
Will we see you on Netflix soon?
Oh, well, you know, the book has lived in my mind as a Netflix series since it first started. Okay, so like basically I watched the Netflix series of it in my head and then wrote down what was happening in the Netflix series, you know, because I think it reads as pretty cinematic, the book does, just because that's the way I like books when I read them. But I do have a film and TV agent that I just signed with in the past couple weeks. So she laid out this whole list of producers and production companies and everything that she's going to pitch it to. So who knows? You know, it'd be fun. My kids keep on asking me that same question, but they aren't old enough to watch it, that kind of stuff on Netflix yet anyway. So maybe it'll work out if it's in a few years when they're old enough to watch that kind of stuff.
You might have to film it in Boulder Junction.
Yeah. Well, it was funny because the film and TV agent who's from New York and lives in Los Angeles was like, you know, if you just what would be important for you to retain in like a screen adaptation of this? Like, what would you fight for to make sure made it into the screen version of this? And it's the accents. You have to do the accents properly because it's just I hear I can hear almost no actors ever doing a Wisconsin accent. So I think it almost sounds sort of like exotic to people when they hear someone talking with that sort of accent. So, but I always think of the movie why am I blanking on it now? The one set in Minnesota. I can't think of it.
They're saying Fargo.
Yeah, Fargo. Yeah, sorry, I couldn't hear you. Yes, Fargo. And how many people remember the movie based on that show with the funny accents? You know, I just thought that it added a little something different because without that, without what makes it uniquely Wisconsin, you know, it just becomes another police procedural show, I think, where we all live is, you know, really, really beautiful country for one thing, but also just culturally so interesting. And I don't think most people even know it exists. So
Good job.
So you did purposely write in something that if you have a Northwoods background, you tried to do that?
yeah, I mean, I included references to Quick Trip and Corbell and mosquitoes. It's set in the summer. In fact, it's set in early August. So if you're going to bring a book on a trip to the lake, or if you're going to read something on the patio coming up soon, this would be a good fit.
Sounds fun.
Can't wait to read it.
As far as the second book, just in case anyone's wondering, I asked like, what's it going to be about? And I can say it's Eli is the main character, Eli and Marge, the sheriff, and then the FBI agent. Well, the FBI agent comes back to town from Chicago for the second book. And one of the mystery elements is going to involve Medicare fraud. So, you know, hold on to your seats there, folks. Medicare fraud.
Okay.
Medicare fraud in the Northwoods.
Any kind of fraud in the Northwoods is,
Yeah.
Well, there's a clinic in the book called Wildwood Clinic, and it's this world-renowned clinic. And I modeled that off of Mayo Clinic. You know, I mean, Rochester is not exactly it's not Wisconsin, but it's still, up north kind of. So, and it's this huge city of its own practically now. So Wildwood Clinic in the book is a little bit of a fictionalized version of Mayo Clinic.
Did you model the Green Lake Country Club off of any country club you've been to up here?
No, but I know that there's the Little Bohemia and the other sort of like Prohibition mobster type historical sites and history there. And I thought that, first of all, that's just kind of interesting history anyway. But also I thought, wouldn't it be a nice parallel to have that with, organized crime 100 years later from the Prohibition, and how that might look different today, but maybe still have some of the same elements. And then, some of the things, some of the like names of places and stuff, I meant to go back and change because there's not, as far as I know, a Green Lake Country Club, but there's definitely Green Lake, Wisconsin. And I meant to go back and change that. There's the mention of a private security company. I was trying to look for basically it was a situation where I needed to find a illegal militia, mercenary group. And I just Googled, mercenary groups in Europe and just picked a name. And then I meant to go back and change it to something fictional and I didn't. So oops. Nobody has noticed that yet. And I haven't gotten any knocks on my door in the middle of the night. So I think I'm okay. There's all sorts of goofy little things that, you just hope for the best.
Do you ever expect this to all happen? I mean, or was this just kind of, just happened?
I felt the longer that I worked on this particular story, the more confident I felt that there could be an audience for it. And I somehow, for some reason, certainly not precedent, had confidence in my ability to write it. Which I don't know why I had that confidence, because like I said, I had never written anything before, but I had practiced a whole lot. I had been a student of it for a long time, and I felt confident that I wasn't going to write some garbage. And then it just boiled down to how badly did I really want this, and I, going back to what I said earlier, yeah, you hear all this stuff about how impossible it is to publish a book, but 9/10 of it really is just doing the work. So yeah, and it makes it, one thing about all of this that I like is that when it comes to hearing critique of my work or feedback, I have an extremely thick skin, because there's no way anybody could be anywhere near as critical of my own writing as myself. So, and I think that that comes with doing it, that comes with having a certain level of confidence in it, and, being willing to stand behind what product you put out, what art you put out in the world. So I don't know though. I mean, I guess it was a lot of pinch me moments in the past year and a half, 2 years now. Doable though.
Would you do any medical mysteries like Robin Cook, blah, blah, blah?
No. I don't know that I'll end up doing anything that's an actual genre medical mystery, because there's, that is a subgenre of crime fiction. But they'll always have that kind of stuff in it because it's just what I know. I might as well use the knowledge I do have, because I don't know a thing about law enforcement. So I'll just try and, look intelligent in other ways and fake the rest.
Well, having finished half of it so far, you're doing a very good job of faking it, so.
It's like more a matter of keeping certain things vague. And again, like, is this at all plausible? It is good, great. Then that's good enough. And I also, I assumed that my agent or my editor would say something if there was something that was super far off the mark, but then again, maybe not, because I don't know. I'm my friend who's a detective who's going to read the second book for me. I'm really, as I'm writing the draft and working on it, and I'm writing something procedural, I'm just like, oh my God, he's going to look at this and think, what are you thinking? But I'll change it if it comes to that. There's always a way to tweak things, always a way to make it work. When I was very late in the editing stage with the copy editor, remember I said earlier where I had to add a chapter very late in the game to fully flesh out what the conspiracy was. What had happened is the copy editor pointed out a situation that was like, well, you said here that this happened, but then this happened, that it doesn't quite make sense. And I thought, oh my God, oh, I have done it now. I have written myself into a corner that I can't get out of, but I managed to get myself out of that corner. So there's always some way when it's fiction, you can, you can't be ridiculous about it, but you can usually find your way out of a problem.
How do you decide like what level of vocabulary to use? Because, it's like there's a basic, like every day, and then there's a step up, and then.
That's about voice. So my voice as an author, but also the voice that I want for a specific book. So I would say, I would say Northwoods falls sort of in the middle of the spectrum from like very simply written adult fiction to like very literary, almost like old-fashioned level vocabulary. So this one was just sort of halfway in the middle. It's probably just like my own preference, but I thought it would fit the story it was trying to tell. If this was like a young adult love story, the words I chose would not have looked like they do for this book now. So it's a little bit hard to sort of pin down how you create that voice, but this just seemed to be the right one for the book. All these little weird nuances that you can't quite exactly explain, but that are just part of, I suppose, the art side of things.
After reading your book, did any of your family or friends accuse you of putting them in it?
No,
Put any family or friends?
they didn't, because for sure there wasn't anything like it was, none of these characters were based on an actual person at all. I'm trying to think if there was even someone who was sort of based on, not at all. Not at all. I don't know. That would be a tricky thing to try and do that. I know that plenty of other authors do. I was talking to Sarah Paretsky, who, of course, has written like dozens of crime fiction novels with the V.I. Warshawski series, and she was saying that some character in her most recent book, Pay Dirt, was based off of somebody, and she was telling me about having to, do that sort of with this person's knowledge and blessing. I just use my imagination 100%, and then I don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. Just like European mercenary companies coming knocking in the middle of the night. Yeah, no big deal.
I think that being a librarian is kind of being a tough critic because we do get so many books on our desk and come by so many, but I appreciate so far, so like I said, I'm about halfway. I have no clue what's going on.
Oh, good.
That's what you want, because I don't like the books that, oh, I see the writing on the wall, I see what's being, what you're building, but you're not building so much that I can start finishing it for you. So I think that's why I can't put it down, and that's why I don't want to read it so fast. I'm trying to pace myself to make it last. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that's really fun when I do book club events, I go and it'll be like everyone there has read the book. We're going to talk about the book, like the story in detail. And I love to know how many people figured out the mystery before the end. And for those who did, what part was it that tipped them off? It's so fascinating to hear that. And it's parts that I wouldn't have thought. There was a part in Northwoods that so the publisher had already made the arcs. So these are like paperback books that get sent out to like various places ahead of publication. And I hadn't read my own book in like probably 6 to 9 months at this point, but I got an arc and I sat down and I read it cover to cover. And about a third of the way through, there was a scene that I thought, oh my gosh, that gives it away. It just like I put just a little bit too much in and I thought it ruins it. And I emailed my editor to be like, can we take this out? And she's like, do you mean that's like a whole paragraph? Like the formatting and everything has already been put in place. And I don't know, I can check. And so I just didn't hear back. And I assumed it was going to stay in the book and it'd have to be fine. But then I listened to the audiobook version after it came out and that part wasn't in there. So they did go back and take it out before publication, because then I went and looked at the hardcover copy that was actually printed and they did take that part out somehow. But no one, so it's hard to tell whether people would have guessed that or not. But to me, I was glad that they took that out.
Did you notice who the audiobook narrator was?
Did I have say who it was? Yeah. They sent me an email. So it's 2 narrators who do the book because there are 3 point of views. There's Eli, the main character. There's chapters from his point of view. There's chapters from Marge, that's his mother, who's the sheriff. And then there are short snippets from a 3rd point of view character, who's a man. And they did 2 different male narrators to distinguish between Eli and this other male character. Okay, so they sent me an email with little links to click on and names. And so it would be like these 5 guys, okay, you can listen to a snippet of what other stuff they've read. It wasn't them reading snippets of my book. It was like other things that they had made. And it was 5 options for Eli and 5 options for Cal. And then I just picked who I wanted. And one of the reasons I ended up picking the guy who does Eli and Marge's voice is because he's from Green Bay, which is where I'm from. And as it turns out, his name is Chris Henry Coffey, and he's also an actor too, like a voice actor, but an actor. And it turns out that his parents were friends with my parents way back, like before he's a few years older than me. This is probably before I was born even. So like in the late 70s, his parents and my parents were in the same dining club together. So it was super cool. And, his family's got a cabin up by Crivets, and it was just, I thought if there's anybody who can hopefully pull off a Wisconsin accent. So it was cool.
Well, and now that you say that, having been grown up in Green Bay and having had a cabin in Crivets myself, he could totally understand some of those scenes.
Oh yeah, that's part of it. I don't really even know how to describe what Wisconsin is like. Like there's a reason that so many popular TV shows were set in Wisconsin, why it's just, there's this mystique to it that is really unique. Like, so my sister lived in New York City and Brooklyn, and you'd go to these bars that were like super hip and it would be it would be basically a recreation of a northern Wisconsin tavern, you know, right down to like the decor, to the type of beer and the drinks they were drinking, to like how the bartenders were dressed. And I just thought, that hipster thing is basically just what actual Wisconsin culture is. So it's pretty cool.
Interesting.
Did you, looking at, the person that finished the book, did you listen to it or read?
No,
the
I
book?
actually read it on a camping trip and I highly
Okay.
recommend it. But I had to slow myself down too because I wanted it to last for my couple days of camping.
Yeah.
And it was tempting to just sit and read it and find out what happened, so. Because there are a lot of red herrings, so I did not figure it out before the end. I rarely do, I'm not great at mystery reading that way. But I thought it was, there were a lot of different threads you could have chased down, that ended up not being the answer, so it was really interesting in that way.
It I think was, so when Northwoods came out, I had not yet gotten a deal for any future books in the series. The publisher knew right away that I had intended for this to be series, and they're like, we are very interested in doing that. We just, you know, right now we're going to be buying this one book. So they couldn't put anything in the like copy up on Amazon or wherever or in the press to say it was book one of a series. And my editor and I thought it was abundantly clear from the way the book ends that there's more to come. But like the Kirkus review for my book, it was positive, but it ended with some loose threads. And we're just like, well, yes, there were loose threads. It's the first in the series. So that was a little bit tricky trying to navigate that, because there are a lot of people who do not like loose ends unless they know for a fact there's more coming.
Mhm.
But I had even more loose ends, believe it or not, that I took out. There was even more that my editor would be like, there's this thing you brought up in chapter 6, and then it just sort of fizzles out. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess I'll take that out.
Bev, I'm not sure if you're still listening. Bev is on Zoom with us. Just wanted to know if you wanted to unmute, if you had any questions.
No, I have no questions. I'm interested in the Wisconsin or the Milwaukee area mystery writers. I've read some of the Mailboat series, and the name of the author totally escapes me, but there again, I like to read books that are set where I might be able to visualize the whole scene that you're talking about or writing about. That's why I like William Kent Krieger. I like Victoria Houston, just people who write in Wisconsin. Kathleen Ernst, some of the heirloom mysteries that she writes. And so that I can visit that location, stuff like that. So I really enjoy what you're telling us about Wisconsin. Plus I have a healthcare background, so I'm really interested in what you write about that too. Thank you for coming, for
thank you,
being with
yeah.
us.
Wisconsin readers are really into Wisconsin authors and books set in Wisconsin. I can tell you, even just from my little experience so far, like the South Central Wisconsin library system, so Madison-ish, had like, they have, I think, 83 copies of the book, and they still have something like 400 or 500 people on the waiting list for it. So, and that just blows my mind. I live in Wanakee, which is like suburb of Madison, I guess you could say. And they've got their Lucky Day shelf where it's all like the new releases and whatever. And my book was on the Lucky Day shelf, and I couldn't believe it. It was right there next to Prince Harry's biography and, you know, like lessons in chemistry and something by, you know, Patterson and Stephen King. It was so cool. It was so cool. That kind of stuff. I don't think I would have even dared to think that could happen, to be honest. I mean, there's a difference between getting your book published and that, to me. And that part I couldn't have predicted. And I'm so thankful. My family goes to the library all the time. My daughter is like the biggest reader I know. It's just and it's an awesome thing.
And actually, that's how I find out about some books that don't hit my radar is my patrons come in and say, I just heard about a great book and will you get it for the library? So it's a great way to know what's coming out when we're not paying attention because we're doing budgets or paying bills, is to have our patrons recommend, and big readers who read several books a week give me great ideas.
Yeah, I know. I don't think I have ever been as big a reader as some of the folks that I know now because of having published this book. You know, people who read 30 books a month, you know, I just I feel like I'd have trouble finding that many books. So that's why it's probably great that these folks are out there on social media, like talking about what books they're enjoying, because otherwise, you know, I feel like it's hard to find books that I really, really love. And you know what, I'm terrible about not finishing a book if it isn't capturing either my mood at the moment or my attention span. Like there was a book that I read that was a perfectly good book. And I had like 20 pages left and I just stopped reading it. And then, oh, I know what it was. It was an excellent book. It was The Great Believers by Rebecca Mackay. And I did an author event with Rebecca in Kenosha this spring when the paperback for I Have Some Questions for You came out. And I felt so bad that I just like set that book down when there was 20 pages left. So I think there's just something about me. I don't know why I do that, but I do that.
The flip side of that is when you do finish those 20 pages and say, I didn't need to. 'Cause
Oh,
sometimes the book is the type that you finish it because you just know you have to finish it, but it didn't. Yeah.
I must be just, I am, and I think I have justification for being extremely ruthless with my time. You know, if if I'm reading a book, even if it's like fine, if I find myself putting it down and not reaching back for it, I usually don't. It ends up sitting there and finally it's overdue at the library and, you know, I've put it in the huge bag of books to go back to the library. But
Anybody else have any more questions?
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thanks so much for coming out. It's a
Thank
beautiful
you.
night down here. I would assume it's up there too. Really nice finally.
Yeah. Yes, it was a beautiful night.
The mosquitoes are horrible down here though. Just like I don't remember a year when the mosquitoes have been this bad.
Bad here.
Use them up.
Not bad.
Yeah, they are.
Well, we're going to Boundary Waters. We're going to Boundary Waters next weekend, or not this week, but the next. And I hope it doesn't rain because it's been raining like almost daily here for 2 months now.
Same here.
Lot of bugs.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for coming, and Sherry for inviting me.
Thank you. And please, you have my email address, so when you know it's getting close for book number 2, give me a little
Yeah.
teaser. So I remember
Yes.
to get everybody else excited about it.
If I had to guess, and if all goes perfectly, I would look for that book. It's called Wildwood. I would look for it at the very end of 2025.
Awesome. Wonderful. All right.
So, okay,
you.
have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.